Well, welcome to Speaking of Horses. I'm your host, Wayne Williams, and we're ready to go right here with some of the great stories from the horse industry. So join us as we get ready to go speaking of horses right here on this station. Well, hey, this is Wayne Williams speaking of horses. Today on the radio program, we're really happy to have with us Mr. John Schwartzler. Now, John works with the Gold Rush Fire Brigade. They were in the Rose Parade again this year. They are based up out of Sacramento, California. And they preserve and display many of the old horse-drawn fire wagons. They do have a pumper that was unable to attend the Rose Parade this year, but they have all of these pieces of equipment. They maintain them. They have a 1890s brass band and everything, and it's really quite a project, and John's been involved for many years with this. So, John, welcome, and tell us how you got involved with this.
Well, thank you, Wayne. I was part of the CSFA steamer team for 20 years, and we did several Rose Parades, and we traveled up and down the state doing over 50 events a year, representing the Fire Service, California State Firemen's Association. And that brought me, with my horse background with Wagons, it brought me in contact, obviously, with the Fire Service and the history of the Fire Service. So I took an interest in that type of equipment. My father having been a fireman, and I was a fireman in our local department. It was the natural evolution to acquire equipment, restore it, and start doing events in our local region. And that's what brought me into it.
Well, you know, it's a real piece of history that a lot of the younger people today aren't really aware of or don't pay attention to. And, you know, it shows how labor-intensive fighting fires years ago was. I mean, you had to have teams of horses ready. You had to have a system almost in that fire station where you could harness and go on a moment's notice and then be able to, you know, pull the various pieces of equipment. And again, tons of manpower. There was a lot of manpower required to do that.
Yes, there was. They developed systems to be efficient. They developed spider harness systems that would drop the horses were trained to, on the sound of the bell ringing, their stall doors would open automatically, and they would run and stand in position where they were to be hooked up. The spider harness would be dropped down from the ceiling on them, and they quick coupled, and they were able to get the apparatus out of the station house in just over a minute.
Wow, a minute? 1 minute?
1 minute, they would be rolling all of the apparatus, the ladder truck, the hose wagon, the steam engine, and the chief's buggy. They could get them all out of the station in just over a minute.
Wow. So now, your background with this, you do a lot of the horse work, correct?
We have American Cream draft horses. I'm the president of the association nationally, and have been breeding them. And our babies are what our current teams are now that we use. And I bring in other teamsters, mostly with Percherons, to supplement our horses. And so, yeah, I'm the horse guy on that project.
Well, I know you and I, at the reception this year for all of the equestrian units before the Rose Parade, of course, I was out there with Equest Fest, but you and I talked quite a bit at that buffet and reception about the American Cream Draft and your involvement with them. And tell us a little bit about the American Cream, the draft.
Well, the registry goes back to 1900. It was an American-based breed association that was sanctioned in 1944. So it's a very old breed here in the country. The root horse, after doing a lot of research, I was able to find how it got here on this continent, because obviously there's no indigenous horses. And it came over with the American circus in the 1830s, and horses up until about 1880. And those horses, in the winter grounds of the American circus at that time, Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey, was up in Baraboo, Wisconsin, which sits a couple hours distance from Story County, Iowa, where this mare was found. My research showed cream horses in the Milwaukee Fire Department and other areas around that region. So they had populated it, and if they retired circus horses, they would put to other uses.
Okay, so they started going in that direction. Now, you mentioned Baraboo. I live about 75 to 80 miles southeast of Baraboo. So I'm very familiar with the Circus World Museum and the history of Ringling Brothers in Baraboo, Wisconsin. And of course, a rich history in draft horses up in this part of the world between Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, huge in the draft horse.
It certainly is. And that region, Baraboo is a wonderful resource. I spent several sessions in their research library to pull up all the information on the history of these cream horses. And they came from Europe through the French, but they were a German horse owned by the English. It's kind of complicated.
Yeah, I'm trying to piece this together in my mind right now.
Let me explain it real quickly. In 1740, in the Moorish Wars, the German knights that supported Queen Isabel in driving the Moors out of Spain were gifted a horse called the Isabella horse. It was a cream horse. They took it up into Germany, in particular the region around Hanover, and bred it into their draft stock and built coach horses. These were for traveling. They're a draft stock, but they extended at the trot, their stride extends. It doesn't go up like a Clydesdale would or a Frisian. So they're travelers, and they were excellent coach horses. They became the sole coach horses of the Elector of Hanover, which is like a king. Well, in 1714, England reached out to their closest heir to the throne, to George Georg I, who was George I, who took the crown of England and brought his coach horses with him. He became a dual monarch. He ruled England and what you would call Germany at the same time. He was a dual monarchy. And it remained that way for up until Queen Victoria. And the Germans would not have a woman rule them. So then it segregated Germany at that point. But prior to that, through King George III, and William IV, it was dual monarchy. And in 1803, this is a pivot point in history. The only time in history the cream horse was not in the possession of the royal family was when Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Germany. And by doing so, he invaded England. And he took the royal stud in Memton and took ownership of several hundred of the king's horses. The king still had his horses in England, and they continued to use them in the royal hitch for state events, pulling the gold coach to open Parliament or coronations up until 1922. The English never let go of one of the royal horses, but Napoleon had confiscated some in his military campaign, and after the war, the French were asked to return them, and not one horse came back when the war ended in 1813. So the American circuit, traveling over into Europe looking for exotic animals in the very early 1830s, came across a catch of these Hanoverians and brought them back and advertised them in their circus billings as the Royal Hanoverian Creams. And they campaigned them for 50 years.
Wow.
The first circus bandwagon hitch, the big hitches, the first guy who Howes had partnered with earlier on in the 1850s. They actually took the Royal Hanoverian 40th Circus hitch to Europe in 1858 and did a 7-year tour of Europe, entertaining Queen Victoria, who acknowledged the horses were the same as her. So it's all history.
Wow.
I wrote the history out. I have a report on.
Well, I'll tell you what. One of these days, I'm going to do an entire segment with you just on the cream drafts because, well, actually, what I'd like to do is in May of this year, I'll be back out for the Western States Horse Expo, which has changed locations this year. It's still Sacramento, but it's down in Murrieta. I can't think of the exact name.
Oh, Rancho Murrieta.
Yes. Yes. It will be down there, and it will be like the second week in May, so it'll be cooler as well. So anyway, we're starting to run out of time here, John, but it's been a pleasure talking with you. Now, Gold Rush Fire Brigade, you're actually housed in Sacramento, right?
Our headquarters is just east of there, about 4 miles from the gold discovery site. We're in Pilot Hill, right on Highway 49, just 4 miles from the American River where gold.
All right. If somebody needed to get a hold of you or look you up, you've got what's the website?
GoldRushFireBrigade.com.
All right.
It has our contact information in there.
And you've also got a Facebook page, I do believe.
We have Facebook and Instagram, and so there's a variety of ways. They could Google us, and there's a lot of media coverage on it, so they can find us.
Well, John, I appreciate it. We're about out of time, but thank you very much for joining me here on Speaking of Horses, and we look forward to working with you.
I look forward to visiting with you more. It's a lot of fun down in Nashville.
Well, that's our show. I'm your host, Wayne Williams. Speaking of Horses, we'll be back next week with a brand new show. Or join us at speakingofhorses.com.